They say blood is thicker than water, but on a cold Tuesday night in October, in a forgotten town tucked between the mountains and the rain, a 17-year-old boy proved that courage runs thicker than both. He lay bleeding on the floor of a roadside diner, his life draining out of him in a dark river across the cracked linoleum, because he stepped in front of a girl he had never met before. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. He did not know that the phone call she made with trembling, blood-slicked hands was not to the police. It was to her father. And by the time the sun crested the ridge over the quiet town of Pinewood, Oregon, the police were the least of anyone's worries. Because the horizon was not glowing with sunlight. It was glowing with chrome. 200 steel angels were coming, and they were not coming to visit. But before the thunder, before the army of leather and steel descended on a town that had never seen anything louder than a 4th of July parade, there was a girl. And the girl had been running for 3 weeks. Maren Hartley was 16 years old, and she had spent her entire life being someone's daughter. Not just anyone's daughter. She was the only child of Silas Hartley, the man they called Iron Hand, founding president of the Steel Angels Motorcycle Club. A man who commanded an army of riders across 11 states, men who would lay down their lives at a single word from his mouth. He stood 6'4" with a beard like iron filings and arms thick as railroad ties covered in ink that told stories of roads traveled and debts collected and a life lived entirely outside the lines that ordinary people drew around themselves. He was rich. He was powerful. He was feared in every biker bar from Reno to Seattle and respected in clubhouses across the country. He had given Maren everything a girl could want: a roof over her head, food on the table, men who would protect her with their last breath. Everything except a choice. Maren did not want the leather. She did not want the clubhouse with its permanent haze of cigarette smoke and whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. She did not want the armed escorts to school the way her classmates looked at her with a mixture of fascination and fear. The way teachers never called on her because they did not want trouble with her or father. She did not want the way grown men twice her size would avert their eyes when she passed, not out of respect for her, but out of fear of him. She did not want to be a princess in a kingdom built on gasoline and silence. She wanted to choose her own life. She wanted to walk into a room and be nobody's daughter, nobody's leverage, nobody's responsibility. She wanted to disappear. So 3 weeks ago, on a night when the moon hung low over the Nevada desert and her father slept in the room down the hall, Maren Hartley became a ghost. She packed a single bag. She emptied her savings account of $1,400. She caught a Greyhound out of Reno at 4 in the morning, slipping out the back door of the clubhouse while the prospects on night watch were distracted by a poker game in the garage. In Sacramento, she ditched her phone in a trash can outside the bus station. In Medford, she cut her hair short in a gas station bathroom, watching the dark strands fall into the sink like pieces of the life she was leaving behind. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger with storm cloud blue eyes and a jaw set with determination. She was going to become nobody. She was going to build a life that belonged to her alone. But the road had other plans. 3 weeks of cheap motels and cold bus stations and meals made of vending machine crackers had turned 1,400 hours into 23. Her clothes smelled like diesel exhaust and stale coffee. She had blisters on her feet from boots that were never made for walking boots, designed for standing on the foot pegs of a motorcycle, not for trudging through rain-soaked parking lots and endless bus station corridors. And then at a Greyhound stop in Portland, she made the mistake that would change everything. She grabbed the wrong bag. The Portland bus station was a cathedral of exhaustion. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow pallor. The air smelled of floor cleaner and desperation. Maren had been on the road for 18 hours straight, her eyes burning, her mind foggy with the kind of fatigue that turns the world into a series of disconnected images. The bags looked identical. Black nylon duffels. No name tags, the kind of generic luggage that 1,000 travelers carry through 1,000 bus stations every day. Her bag had been sitting on the seat beside her. When she got up to use the restroom, another passenger must have moved it. When she came back, she grabbed the nearest black duffel, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out into the Portland rain without a second thought. She did not realize the mistake until she was 2 hours south. A farmer heading to Eugene had offered her a ride in the bed of his pickup truck, And Marin had accepted because the next bus was not until morning and the temperature was dropping. She sat with her back against the gate watching the Oregon pines blur past in the gray afternoon light, the rain misting against her face. She unzipped the bag to find a sweatshirt. What she found instead made her blood freeze. It was not her clothes. It was not her toothbrush or her dog-eared copy of the novel she had been reading to pass the hours. Inside were bundles of cash. Thousands of dollars wrapped tight in rubber bands stacked in neat rows like bricks of compressed paper. And beneath the cash, taped to the lining of the bag, with strips of clear packing tape, a small black flash drive in a plastic case. Marin stared at the contents. Her hands began to shake despite the cold. She had grown up in the shadow of the outlaw world. She had seen men pass envelopes under tables in the back room of the clubhouse. She had overheard conversations in coded language that she was never supposed to understand. She knew with the instinct that comes from a lifetime of proximity to dangerous men and dangerous business exactly what she was looking at. This was not lost luggage. This was evidence. This was leverage. This was the kind of thing that got people buried in shallow graves in the Oregon woods. She zipped the bag shut with trembling fingers. Her first instinct was to throw it out of the truck, let it tumble into the ditch alongside the highway and become someone else's problem. But even as the thought formed, she knew it would not work. If someone was looking for this bag, they would trace the Greyhound manifest. They would find the pickup driver who had given a ride to a girl with short hair and a leather jacket. They would follow the trail, and at the end of that trail, they would find her. The only way to stay safe was to keep moving, to figure out what she was carrying so she could figure out how to give it back without ending up dead. Marin knocked on the rear window of the cab. The farmer slowed down at the next intersection, and she climbed out with a wave of thanks, her boots splashing in the puddles along the shoulder of the road. She was 60 miles from Portland, 80 miles from Eugene, standing at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere with a bag full of cash and secrets and absolutely no idea what to do next. A rusted sign pointed down a narrow two-lane road. Pinewood, Oregon, population 2,847. Marin started walking. Pinewood was the kind of town that existed in the margins of America. It sat in a valley between two ridges of the Cascade foothills, surrounded by dense Douglas fir forests that pressed in on all sides like dark green walls. The main street was 4 blocks long, anchored by a hardware store run by a man named Gus, who had been old for as long as anyone could remember, and a barber shop with a striped pole that had not spun since the motor burned out in 1998. There was a white clapboard church with a bell that rang at 6 every morning, and a bar called the Rusty Nail that closed at 10 on weeknights because there was nobody left to drink past 10. The population sign at the edge of town read 2,847, but that was optimistic. Half the houses on the back roads had been empty since the lumber mill closed in 2003. The young people left for Portland or Eugene or anywhere that had a future. The old people stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Pinewood was a town that time had forgotten and progress had skipped over. A place where the most exciting thing in recent memory was the high school football team making the state quarterfinals 2 years ago. They lost by 31 points, but the town still talked about it like it was the moon landing. Marin arrived on foot just as the sun was setting behind the western ridge. Her sedan, a $900 beater she had bought with cash in Eugene, sat abandoned 3 miles back on Route 9 with a blown tire and no spare. She had walked the rest of the way in the rain, the black duffel bag over her shoulder growing heavier with every step. By the time she reached the edge of town, night had fallen. The streets were empty. The only light came from a squat, flat-roofed building where Route 9 met the highway that led to everywhere else. A neon sign buzzed in the rain, Rosie's Diner, 24 hours. The second word was burned out, giving the sign a lopsided, tired look that matched the building perfectly. Marin stood in the parking lot for a long moment, rain streaming down her face and weighed her options. She had $23, a bag full of someone else's secrets, a car with no tire 3 miles back, no phone, no plan, and somewhere out there, someone was looking for what she was carrying. Through the smeared glass of the diner window, she could see a warm yellow glow. A figure moved behind the counter. One customer sat in a booth near the window, an old man with white hair working on a piece of pie. It looked safe. It looked ordinary. It looked like exactly the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Marin pulled the hood of her leather jacket over her head, gripped the strap of the duffel bag, and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed with a tired little jingle. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, and the faint, permanent ghost of bacon grease that had seeped into the walls and the ceiling tiles and the very bones of the building. The floor was checkered black and white scuffed and stained by decades of boots and spilled coffee. The booths were red vinyl cracked with age, the foam padding showing through like old wounds. A jukebox sat in the corner unplugged and gathering dust. The clock on the wall showed 11:14. Outside, the rain drummed against the windows in silver sheets. Behind the counter stood a boy. He was tall and thin, maybe 17, with shaggy brown hair that fell over his eyes like a curtain he was hiding behind. He wore a flannel shirt over a white undershirt. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows in an apron that had seen better days. His sneakers had holes near the toes. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he wiped down the counter with a rag that looked like it needed its own cleaning. His name tag said Callum. He did not look up immediately when the door chimed. He was used to the sound, the occasional trucker hauling lumber down from the mountains, the odd insomniac who could not sleep and did not want to be alone, the rare lost traveler who had taken a wrong turn off the interstate and ended up in a town that was not on most maps. They came, they ordered coffee, they left. Nobody stayed in Pinewood on purpose. But when he did look up, something made him pause. The girl who had walked in was young, maybe 16, with short dark hair that looked like it had been cut in a hurry, uneven around the edges, sticking up in places where the scissors had not been steady. She wore a leather jacket at least 2 sizes too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her knuckles, and battered combat boots that were dark with rain. She carried a black duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and the weight of it pulled her frame to one side like a ship listing in rough water. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were sharp, storm cloud blue, and they moved across the room with a precision that was almost military. She scanned the corners, the exits, the old man in the booth, the hallway to the restrooms. She clocked everything in 2 seconds flat, the way someone does when they have been trained, or when they have been hunted. Marin slid into a booth near the back, positioning herself so she could see both the front door and the hallway to the restrooms. She set the bag on the seat beside her, one hand resting on it like she was protecting something precious or something dangerous. She did not take off her jacket. Callum walked over with a menu and a glass of water. The menu was laminated and sticky, the edges curling with age. Black coffee. Marin's voice was steady but quiet, the voice of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. And fries if you have them. We always have fries, Callum said. He paused. She was not looking at him. She was watching the parking lot through the window, watching the rain come down in silver sheets against the neon glow. Rough night, he said. It was the most he had said to a customer in weeks. He was not sure why he said it. Maybe because she looked the way he felt most days. Alone, Pine. Tired, a long way from anywhere that mattered. Marin looked up at him. For a second, something shifted behind those guarded eyes. A flicker of surprise, maybe. Or recognition. The recognition of one invisible person seeing another. 2 people who had spent their lives being overlooked, suddenly visible to each other, in the fluorescent glow of a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and forgotten dreams. Just passing through, she said. Callum glanced at the window. He could see her car in the parking lot sitting crooked with a flat tire like a wounded animal. She was not just passing through, but he did not push it. He went back to the counter and poured her coffee. Black, no sugar. He dropped a basket of fries in the oil. The oil sizzled and popped a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Callum Wren had been invisible his entire life. Not in the supernatural sense. In the worst sense. The kind where people look right through you like you are a window they are trying to see past. He was 17 years old. He worked the graveyard shift at Rosie's Diner 4 nights a week. He made $7.25 an hour, plus whatever tips the insomniacs and truckers left behind, which was almost never more than loose change and silence. He had a quiet voice and a habit of looking at the floor when adults spoke to him. Not because he was shy exactly, but because he had learned early that the world paid more attention to you when you were not asking it to. His mother, Lenore Wren, was a small woman with tired eyes and hands rubbed red from years of hard work. She held 2 jobs. Nights at the hospital, feeding sheets and towels into machines that hissed and rumbled through the dark hours. Days cleaning houses on the east side of town, scrubbing bathrooms and mopping floors for families who left cash on the kitchen counter and never learned her last name. She had raised Callum alone since he was 9 years old. That was the year his father climbed into the family's Ford Taurus and drove away without a word, without a note, without even the dignity of a goodbye. The car came back 6 months later, abandoned in the driveway with a blown transmission and a busted head gasket. A final insult wrapped in rusted metal. His father did not come back with it. Callum had been trying to fix that car ever since. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, he was in the driveway with a socket wrench and a second-hand Haynes manual, pulling apart the engine piece by piece and putting it back together. The neighbors thought it was a hobby. His mother thought it was therapy. Callum knew the truth that neither of them would say out loud. He believed in some deep and irrational corner of his heart that if he could fix the car, he could fix everything. That if the engine turned over, maybe the world would turn over too. Maybe the emptiness his father had left behind would fill in like a pothole patched with fresh asphalt. Maybe his mother would stop working 2 jobs. Maybe the house would stop feeling like a place where someone was always missing. The engine never turned over, but he kept trying every Saturday, every week, because Callum Wren did not know how to quit on something, even when the something had already quit on him. He brought Marin her coffee and fries. She wrapped both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb the warmth through her skin, like she had not been warm in a long time. "Your tire is flat," Callum said, setting down the basket of fries. "I know. I have got a jack in the back. I can take a look when my shift ends if you want." Marin looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. She studied his face with those careful eyes, reading him the way she had been taught to read people, looking for the angle, the motive, the hidden agenda. He was skinny, a little awkward, kind eyes behind all that hair. He was offering to help a stranger at midnight in the rain, and he was doing it because he did not know how not to. There was no angle. There was no motive. He was just a boy who saw someone who needed help and could not look the other way. "You do not have to do that," Marin said. "I know," Callum replied, and he almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was real. It was the most honest expression she had seen on a human face in 3 weeks. He went back behind the counter. Marin ate her fries, slowly sipping her coffee. For the first time in 3 weeks, the knot in her chest loosened. Just slightly. There was something about this place. This sad little diner in this forgotten town. This boy with his dish rag and his quiet kindness. It made her feel like she could breathe. That feeling lasted exactly 4 minutes. The bell above the door chimed again. The air in the diner changed. It was not a sound, it was a shift. Like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Like the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair on your body stands on end and the air tastes like copper. Marin felt it before she saw it. Her hand moved instinctively to the bag beside her. 4 men walked in. They were not locals. They were older mid-20s wearing expensive streetwear that looked absurdly out of place in a diner that smelled like burnt grease and desperation. 2 of them were thick, heavy-set, with the flat eyes of men who had done ugly things and would do them again without hesitation. The third was wiry and twitchy, his eye darting around the room like a rat looking for an exit. But it was the 4th man who made Marin's blood turn to ice. He was lean with sharp cheekbones and a tattoo of a scorpion crawling up the side of his neck. His eyes were dead, not angry, not cruel, just empty, like looking into 2 holes where a soul should have been. He moved with lazy confidence, hands in the pockets of his black jacket, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. The smirk of a man who enjoyed fear the way some people enjoyed music. His name was Decker. He spotted Marin immediately. The smirk widened into something that was almost a smile but had none of its warmth. "Well, well," his voice was slick and mocking. Oily, the kind of voice that inflicted fear the way some people inflicted bruises. Casually and with pleasure. The little runaway princess. Marin did not scream. She did not run. She had been raised in a world where fear was a weapon and showing it was the same as handing someone a loaded gun. She set her coffee down slowly. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. "Leave me alone, Decker." Her voice was flat, controlled. I told you people, I am done. You do not get to be done, sweetheart. Decker stepped closer. The other three men fanned out behind him, blocking the path to the front door. The wiry one moved toward the hallway, cutting off the back exit. You took something that does not belong to you. My employer is very unhappy. He wants the bag, and he wants you in a car. Right now. Marin's mind raced. They had found her. Somehow. Despite the ditched phone, the cut hair, the cash purchases. The careful avoidance of cameras. 3 weeks across 3 states, and they had tracked her to a diner in a town that nobody had ever heard of. That was not luck. That was not resources. That was information. Someone had told them where she was. She filed that thought away. There would be time to figure out who later. If there was a later, she spoke loudly, making sure the old man in the corner could hear every word. I grabbed the wrong bag at the bus station. It was an accident. I will give it back. But I am not getting in a car with you. That is not how this works, Decker said. Then we have a problem. Because there is an old man right there with a phone, and the police station is 5 minutes away. You want to add kidnapping to whatever your boss has already wanted for. It was a calculated bluff. She did not know if Pinewood even had a police station. But she was buying seconds, stretching the moment. Her eyes flicked to the old man in the corner booth. His name was Walt. He had been coming to Rosie's every Tuesday night for cherry pie in silence for the past 15 years. He was 73 years old, a retired postal worker who had seen enough of the world to know trouble when it walked through the door. His weathered face was tight with alarm. One gnarled hand was already reaching into his coat pocket for his phone. Decker's dead eyes narrowed. He was not used to resistance. He was especially not used to it from a teenage girl. Last chance, princess. Get up, bring the bio, walk out that door, or this gets ugly. Marin stared at him. She did not move. No. The word hung in the air like grenade with the pin pulled. Behind the counter, Callum Wren had stopped breathing. He had watched the whole thing unfold with a growing dread that started in his stomach and climbed into his throat like something alive. He knew he should stay out of it. These men were dangerous, clearly dangerous. The kind of dangerous that did not exist in Pinewood. The kind that came from a world Callum had only seen in movies and news reports. The smart thing to do was duck into the back office, call 911, and hide behind the fryer until the police arrived. That was what any reasonable person would do. That was what his mother would want him to do. Stay safe, Callum. Do not be a hero. Heroes end up in hospitals. But then he saw Decker's hands shoot forward. He saw the man grab the girl's wrist across the table, fingers digging into her skin with a grip that looked like a vise made of bone. He saw Decker yank her forward, pulling her half out of the booth. He saw the pain flash across her face, quickly smothered because she was too proud or too stubborn to give Decker the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. And he saw her eyes. It was not just fear. It was the look of someone who knew with cold certainty that if she walked out that door, she was never coming back. It was the look of someone about to vanish. Callum Wren did not think. He did not calculate the odds. He did not weigh the risks or consider the consequences. He did not ask himself whether this was smart or brave or stupid. He just moved. He vaulted over the counter. It was a move he had imagined 100 times during long, boring shifts. Hands on the formica swing, the legs overland on the other side. He had never actually done it before. His sneaker caught the edge of a coffee pot and sent it crashing to the floor in an explosion of glass and brown liquid. But he stuck the landing. He put himself between Marin and Decker. His chest was heaving. His hands were shaking. He was holding a dirty dish rag in one fist like it was a weapon, a sword, a shield, something more than what it was. Let her go. His voice cracked on the second word. He was terrified. Every nerve in his body was screaming at him to run, to hide, to be invisible again. But his feet were planted on the checkered floor, and he was not moving. He was not moving because something deeper than fear, something that lived in the marrow of who he was, would not let him stand behind a counter while a girl was taken. Decker stared at him. For a long moment, the diner was completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain hammering on the roof. Then Decker laughed. It was a cold, dry sound, like stones scraping together. Look at this. The busboy wants to play hero. He released Marin's wrist and turned his full attention to Callum. His dead eyes measured the boy the way a wolf measures prey. Go pour some coffee, kid. This is grown-up business. Let her go, Callum said again. Louder this time. Steadier. I am calling the police. Old Walt's voice rang out from the corner booth. His hands were shaking, but he had his phone out and was jabbing at the screen with arthritic fingers. That was the trigger. Decker moved fast, faster than Callum expected. He pulled a collapsible baton from inside his jacket and flicked it open with a sharp metallic snap. The sound alone was enough to make Callum's blood go cold. A mechanical click that promised pain the way a cocking hammer promises death. But Decker did not go for the old man. He swung at Callum. The baton caught Callum on the forearm with a crack that echoed through the diner. Pain exploded up his arm, white-hot and searing like someone had pressed a branding iron against his bone. He gasped, staggering back. But he did not go down. Adrenaline raw and animal surged through him like electricity. He shoved Decker backward with both hands, hard. Harder than he knew he could push. Decker stumbled, genuinely surprised by the force. Get him! Decker snapped at his men. Run! Callum yelled at Marin. Go out the back. Marin scrambled out of the booth, grabbing the bag. But the wiry man was blocking the hallway, and one of the heavy-set thugs was lunging toward her from the side. Callum threw himself at the closest man, the one going for Marin. They crashed into a table, sending salt shakers and napkin holders and bottles of ketchup and mustard flying. Glass shattered, condiments sprayed across the floor. Callum fought with everything he had, wild and desperate throwing punches that had no technique but plenty of fury. He caught the man square on the jaw with a right hook that surprised them both. The thug stumbled, momentarily stunned, but there were 4 of them, and they were professionals. Marin did not run. She could have. The hallway was momentarily clear, while the wiry man rushed to help his friends with Callum. She could have sprinted out the back door into the rain and the dark and disappeared. She had spent 3 weeks running. She was good at it. But she watched Callum, the skinny kid she had known for 15 minutes, fighting 3 men twice his size. Because he could not stand by while someone was taken. He was getting beaten badly. A fist caught him in the ribs. A knee drove into his thigh. He kept swinging, kept fighting, but he was losing ground fast. Marin made a decision. She grabbed the nearest heavy object she could find. A full glass bottle of ketchup, the old-fashioned kind, thick and heavy. She gripped it by the neck, swung it with both hands, and brought it crashing down on the back of the nearest thug's skull. The bottle did not break like in the movies. It connected with a dull, wet thud that vibrated up her arms. The man crumpled instantly, hitting the floor like a sack of wet cement. But the distraction cost Callum his focus. He turned toward the sound for a fraction of a second. That was when Decker came from behind. He had put the baton away. In his hand now was a knife, a 6-inch switchblade with a matte black handle. The blade caught the harsh fluorescent light. Marin saw it first. No, she screamed. Callum turned. Too late. Not enough. The blade punched into his side just below the ribs on the left. It went in deep. Marin heard the sound, a wet, intimate sound that she would hear in her nightmares for years to come. The sound of steel entering flesh, of something being broken that could never be fully repaired. Callum gasped. The air left his lungs all at once, like someone had ripped the plug out of a balloon. He looked down at the knife in Decker's hand, still buried in his side, and his expression was not pain. It was surprise. Pure, uncomprehending surprise, as if his body had not yet informed his brain what had happened. Decker pulled the blade free. The blood came immediately. Dark, fast, terrifyingly warm. It soaked through Callum's flannel shirt and spilled over his hand as he clutched his side. He fell to his knees, then to his back. The diner floor was cold against his skin, a mosaic of shattered glass, spilled ketchup, and his own blood spreading in a slow, dark pool. Decker kicked him once in the chest with cold efficiency. Callum's head cracked against the tile. Stupid kid, Decker spat. Sirens, distant but closing. Old Walt had gotten through. The police were coming. We have to go. The wiry man's eyes were darting to the window. Too much heat now. Decker looked at Marin. Then he looked at the boy bleeding on the floor. Something ugly and satisfied flickered in those dead eyes. He pointed at Marin with the bloody knife. This is not over. Tell your daddy we are coming, for the bag, and for the rest. They bolted. All 4 of them, one half dragging the man Marin had hit with the bottle, sprinting through the front door, and piling into a black Chevy Tahoe that peeled out of the parking lot just as the first red and blue lights appeared through the rain. Then they were gone, and the silence that followed was worse than the violence, because silence is where the consequences live. Marin was on her knees beside Callum before the echo of the Tahoe's tires had faded. The floor was a war zone. Glass ketchup, mustard, and blood. So much blood. It was spreading faster than she had thought possible, pooling around his body, soaking into the knees of her jeans, warm against her skin. Callum's face was gray. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the flickering fluorescent light above him. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Each breath, a thin whistle that sounded wrong, deeply fundamentally wrong. Marin did not panic. She had grown up in clubhouses where men came in bleeding from bar fights and worse. She had watched her father's medic stitch wounds on kitchen tables while the television played in the background. She knew the basics. She ripped off her leather jacket, balled it up, and pressed it against the wound in Callum's side with both hands. She leaned her full weight into it. "Stay with me." Her voice was calm, forceful, the voice of a girl who had decided that this boy was not going to die on her watch. "Stay with me, Callum. Look at me. Do not close your eyes." Callum blinked. His gaze drifted to her face. He coughed. Blood flecked his lips, pink, frothy. That was bad. Marin knew it was bad. It meant the blade had gone deep enough to reach the lung or close to it. "You are okay," Callum whispered. His voice was barely there, a dry rasp like dead leaves on concrete. "They did not take you." "No," Marin said. Tears were burning her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Not yet." "No, they did not. Because of you." "You held the line." Callum tried to smile. It was lopsided, pale, and it broke something inside Marin that she did not know could break. "Good," he breathed. "That is good." Then his eyes rolled back and his body went slack beneath her hands. Old Walt was beside her, his gnarled hands pressing a stack of diner napkins against the wound alongside hers. His face was white, but his hands were steady. The hands of a man who had carried mailbags through blizzards for 40 years and knew how to keep going when the world was coming apart. "Ambulance is coming, girl. 3 minutes. He is strong. He will make it." Marin did not take her hands off the wound. She did not look up from Callum's face. She kept pressure. She kept talking. She told him to hold on. She told him the ambulance was close. She told him she wasn't going to let him go. She meant it. She meant it more than she had ever meant anything in her 16 years on this earth. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The ambulance arrived with the police. Paramedics rushed in, took over, cut away Callum's shirt, started IV lines. They worked fast, their voices clipped and urgent. They loaded Callum onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance with a speed that told Marin everything she needed to know about how bad it was. When people moved that fast, it meant there was no time to waste. Marin stood in the middle of the ruined diner, covered in blood, Callum's blood. Her leather jacket was soaked dark. Her hands were red up to the wrists. She was shaking. Not from cold, from the delayed shock of adrenaline finally releasing its grip. A deputy tried to talk to her. She could not hear him. The sirens were still screaming in her head. She followed the ambulance to the hospital. She walked, because her car had a flat tire 3 miles back and nobody had thought to offer her a ride, and she would not have accepted one anyway. She needed the cold. She needed the rain. She needed the 2-mile walk in the dark to process what had just happened. She walked with the black duffel bag over her shoulder, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the red and blue lights of patrol cars racing past her toward the diner. She did not feel the rain. She did not feel the cold. She felt only one thing, a burning crystalline resolve that settled into her bones like molten iron cooling into steel. This was her fault, all of it. A boy she had known for 15 minutes was on an operating table because she had walked into his diner carrying a problem she had no right to bring to his door. She could not undo that. She could not take back the knife. But she could make sure it meant something. She could make sure the people who did this answered for it. And she could make sure Callum Wren did not die in the dark without someone fighting for him the way he had fought for her. The Pinewood County Hospital was a small building, 2 stories, brick, with a parking lot that held maybe 40 cars. It was not equipped for what had just come through its doors. The emergency room had 2 bays. The surgical suite was designed for appendectomies and broken bones, not knife wounds that shredded livers and punctured diaphragms. Dr. Ashford, the lead trauma surgeon, a lean man with silver hair and steady hands, arrived 9 minutes after Callum. Still pulling on his scrubs, the team worked frantically. The knife had lacerated Callum's liver, nicked his diaphragm, ruptured his spleen. He was losing blood faster than they could replace it. Marin sat in the waiting room. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her, casting everything in a flat, sterile white. She was still wearing Callum's blood. A nurse offered her a change of clothes. She refused. She did not deserve clean clothes, not while he was in there fighting. At 3 in the morning, Dr. Ashford emerged from surgery. He looked like a man who had been in a prize fight and only barely won. His scrubs were sweat-soaked. His eyes were bloodshot. The boy made it through surgery. Ashford's voice was careful, measured, but it was close. The blade lacerated his liver and nicked his diaphragm. We had to remove his spleen. He has lost a massive amount of blood. He is in a medically induced coma. What are his chances? 40%. Ashford met her eyes. If he does not develop an infection, if his vitals stabilize over the next 48 hours, he has a fighting chance. But I will not lie to you, it is going to be close. 40%, less than a coin flip. Marin felt the number land in her chest like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples of dread spreading outward. Lenore Wren arrived at 3:15. She was a small woman, thin with tired eyes and hands red and rough from years of hard work. She came in a coat thrown over her nightgown. Her hair unbrushed her face, a mask of terror that Marin recognized because she had seen it in the mirror 30 minutes ago. When Lenore saw Marin, she froze. "Are you hurt?" Because that was the kind of woman she was. Even in the worst moment of her life, her first instinct was to care for someone else. "No, ma'am," Marin said. "This is not my blood. It is Callum's. He saved my life tonight." Lenore's face crumbled. She collapsed into a chair, pulling a rosary from her coat pocket. The beads clicked softly between her fingers, a tiny rhythmic sound that filled the silent waiting room like a heartbeat. Marin sat down across from her. She could not leave. She tried to explain that help was coming, that the medical bills would be covered. But how do you explain to a terrified mother that a biker army is descending on her town because her son was brave enough to stand up? You do not explain. You just sit with her. You hold the silence. You share the weight. They sat together through the darkest hours of the morning. Two strangers bound together by a boy's courage and a pool of blood on a diner floor. Lenore prayed. Marin watched the clock. The minutes crawled like wounded animals. And then Marin made the call that would change everything. She had a cheap prepaid phone she had bought in Eugene 3 weeks ago. She had never used it. She had kept it for one purpose. A phone number she had memorized and sworn she would never dial unless the world was ending. The world was ending. She walked to the corner of the waiting room. She dialed. It rang twice, yeah. A deep voice. No hello, no greeting, just a single syllable that sounded like gravel rolling in a cement mixer. Marin closed her eyes. She had not heard that voice in 3 weeks. It sounded like home. It sounded like safety, and it sounded like everything she had been running from. "Daddy," she whispered the word. The silence on the other end was instant and absolute. It was the silence of a man whose entire body had gone rigid, whose heart had stopped between beats. "Marin, where are you? Are you hurt?" "No, I am okay." "But Daddy, they found me. Decker and his crew, the ones who work for Blackwell, they tracked me down. I am on my way." The words came fast, automatic, with the force of a freight train. "Wait," Marin said. And here it was, the moment that separated Marin Hartley from every other club daughter, every other runaway, every other girl who called her father for help. She did not just call for rescue. She set the terms. "Daddy, listen to me. A boy saved me tonight. He works at a diner. He is 17 years old. He stepped between me and Decker and took a knife for me. He is in surgery right now, and they are telling me he might not make it." She paused. Her voice did not waver. "He does not know who I am. He does not know who you are. He just saw a girl in trouble and he stood up. He bled for me, Daddy." When Silas spoke again, his voice was different. The sharpness was still there, but beneath it was something raw, something ancient. The voice of a man who understood sacrifice the way a priest understands prayer. "What is his name?" "Callum. Callum Wren. Is he still breathing? Barely. Tell the doctors to do everything. Tell them money is no object. Tell them Silas Hartley is paying every bill. Marin took a breath, and then she drew the line in the sand. You come for him, not for me. The words hung in the air between them, separated by 300 miles of highway and a lifetime of complicated love. You come because a boy is dying for doing the right thing, and you come within the law. No rivers, no ditches, no disappearances. You come right or you do not come at all. The pause was long. She could hear him breathing. She could hear faintly the sound of boots on concrete. He was already moving. You do not give me orders, Marin. I am not giving you an order. I am asking you to be the man I used to believe you were. Another pause. Longer. We are coming. Silas said the words slowly, deliberately, like a man making a vow. All of us. The line went dead. Marin lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. She looked at Detective Whitford, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and a nicotine stain on his index finger, who had arrived to take her statement and was watching her from across the room with a mixture of suspicion and unease. Who was that? Whitford asked. Your father, Marin nodded. Is he coming to pick you up? Marin looked out the window at the dark, empty parking lot. The rain had not stopped. It streamed down the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the glow of the streetlights. He is coming, Marin said quietly, but he is not coming alone. It started around 5:30. The first hint of gray light was touching the eastern sky, just enough to separate the mountains from the clouds. Deputy Harris was parked on Route 9, drowsy, half asleep in his cruiser, with the radar gun in his lap. He was not watching for speeders. He was fighting to keep his eyes open after a long night of taking statements and processing a crime scene at a diner that had never seen anything worse than a drunk trucker. He was not watching for what came instead. He felt it before he heard it. A tremor, subtle at first, like a heavy truck on a nearby road. The coffee in his cup holder rippled. The rearview mirror vibrated. Then came the sound. It started low, a drone like a swarm of hornets far away. But it grew, it deepened. It turned into a roar that was not a roar but a thunder. A rolling, continuous thunder that shook the windows of his cruiser and rattled the fillings in his teeth. V-twin engines, the distinctive syncopated heartbeat of American iron. Not one, not 10, hundreds. Harris looked in his side mirror. His jaw dropped. Cresting the hill 2 miles back, a wall of headlights appeared. They stretched across both lanes of the highway. 3 abreast. Running lights blazing like the eyes of an advancing army. The lead bike was a massive custom Harley Road King. Blacked out, ape-hanger handlebars, a rider who looked less like a man and more like a monument carved from granite and leather. Harris fumbled for his radio. Dispatch, this is Harris on Route 9. We have a situation. By the time the sun fully broke over the ridge, the roar had consumed Pinewood. Citizens waking for work peered through their curtains and saw something out of a fever dream. A river of black leather and polished chrome rolling down Main Street, shaking the autumn leaves from the trees, rattling the windows of the hardware store, drowning out the church bells that rang at 6 every morning. They turned onto Elm Street, toward the hospital. Marin heard them before she saw them. She was standing in the window of the waiting room. Lenore was asleep in the chair behind her, finally claimed by exhaustion. The first light of dawn was coloring the sky in shades of ash and steel. Then the glass began to vibrate. The sound rose from the earth like something alive. A rumble that grew into a growl that grew into a roar that shook the pictures on the walls. Marin pressed her hand against the window. She felt the vibration through her palm, through her bones. They came around the corner in a wave, row after row of motorcycles, headlights blazing, chrome gleaming in the early light. They filled the parking lot. They spilled onto the street. They lined the sidewalks. 200 machines, 200 men, arranged in perfect rows like soldiers on a parade ground. At the front, the massive Road King killed its engine. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 engines cut out in a wave one after another. The silence spreading through the formation like a held breath. Silas Hartley dismounted. He was everything Marin remembered and everything she had been running from. 6'4", beard like iron filings, arms thick as railroad ties covered in ink that told stories of roads and brotherhood and a life lived outside the lines. He took off his helmet and hung it on the handlebar. He walked straight toward the sliding glass doors. Behind him, 200 men dismounted and stood in rank, silent, arms crossed, waiting. Inside the waiting room, Marin watched her father push through the doors. He filled the room with his presence the way a thunderstorm fills a valley. Nurses froze. An orderly dropped a clipboard. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to quiet. His eyes found Marin. Daddy. She did not run to him. She stood her ground, because that was what she had promised herself she would do. She would not collapse into his arms like a little girl. Not now. Not after everything she had done to prove she was more than that. But Silas crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her in his arms anyway. For one moment the mask slipped. He was not a club president. He was not Iron Hand. He was a father who had not slept in 3 weeks, who had torn the West Coast apart looking for his daughter, who had driven through the night fueled by nothing but terror and love. He held her so tight she could not breathe. She let him, just for a moment. Then she pulled back. I am okay, she said, looking up at him with those fierce storm cloud eyes. But he is not. She pointed down the hallway. Room 304. His name is Callum Wren. 40% chance. His mother is right there. Silas released Marin. He turned. His eyes found Lenore Wren, who had been jolted awake by the noise and was now standing trembling, backed against the wall, clutching her rosary as if it were the only thing between her and the end of the world. Silas walked over to her. The leather of his cut creaked with every step. His boots were heavy on the linoleum. He was a terrifying figure, a mountain of muscle and ink and scars. And Lenore was shaking so hard the rosary beads were clicking. He stopped in front of her. He slowly removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red-rimmed from the wind and the worry and the long night ride. But they were kind, unexpectedly, unmistakably kind. He went down on one knee. The president of the Steel Angels knelt on the scuffed linoleum floor of a county hospital in front of a cleaning lady in a nightgown. Ma'am, his voice was a low rumble, but it was gentle, reverent. My name is Silas Hartley. Your son saved my little girl's life last night. Lenore stared at him. She could not speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. There is no debt I can pay that equals what he did. Silas continued, but I promise you this. Your boy is under my protection now. He is under the protection of the Steel Angels. The men who did this to him. He stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. We are going to find them, and God help them, because the police will not be able to. Marin watched from across the room. She watched her father kneel before a stranger, and she saw something she had not seen in years. She saw the man she used to believe in. The man who built his king not on fear, but on a code. Loyalty earned, debts paid, the weak protected by the strong. She had set the terms. He had met them, so far. But the sun was barely up, and the hardest part was still coming. By noon, the town of Pinewood had never been quieter. It was the quiet of held breath, the quiet of a place that had suddenly become aware that something far larger than itself had arrived and settled into its bones like winter frost. The Steel Angels had not come to conquer. They had come to wait, and there is nothing more unsettling than 200 dangerous men with nothing to do but wait. The bikers rotated shifts with military precision. Some slept in the hospital waiting room, stretched across plastic chairs that groaned under their weight. Others patrolled the hallways in pairs, their boots heavy on the linoleum, their eyes scanning every doorway and every corner. They said please and thank you. They held doors open for nurses. They kept their voices down near patient rooms and stepped aside for doctors rushing to emergencies. It was by all accounts the most courteous occupation in history. The nurses and staff adapted with the resigned practicality of people who had no other choice. What else could they do? Call the police. The police were already there and they were outnumbered 20-1. Sheriff Guthrie had arrived at 7 in the morning with 3 deputies, taken one look at the sea of chrome and leather filling the parking lot, and retreated to his cruiser to make phone calls that Marin suspected would accomplish nothing. The Steel Angels were not breaking any laws. They were parked legally. They were not carrying visible weapons. They were technically just a very large group of concerned citizens visiting a hospital. The fact that they could tear the building apart with their bare hands if they chose to was left unspoken. Silas had not moved from the ICU waiting area since his arrival. He sat in a plastic chair that looked absurdly small beneath his massive frame, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the double doors that led to the surgical recovery wing. Dr. Ashford delivered updates every 2 hours. Callum had made it through the night. His vitals were stabilizing. The next 48 hours would tell the story. Silas listened to each update with the focused intensity of a man receiving battlefield reports. When Ashford mentioned that the hospital's blood supply was running low, Silas made a single phone call. Within 3 hours, a refrigerated truck arrived from Portland with enough blood products to stock the hospital for 6 months. When Ashford mentioned that the surgical team was exhausted, Silas made another call. By evening, 2 trauma surgeons from a teaching hospital in Eugene had arrived to provide relief. Money was not an object. Resources were not a problem. The Steel Angels had spent 30 years building an empire, and now that empire was being deployed for a single purpose, keeping a 17-year-old boy alive. But it was not Silas who was running the operation. It was Marin. She had not slept since the diner. She had not changed out of her blood-stained clothes. She had refused every offer of food, every suggestion that she rest every attempt by her father's men to take care of her, the way they had been taking care of her since she was born. She did not want to be taken care of. She wanted answers. The black duffel bag sat on the floor beside her chair, and inside that bag was a flash drive that had already cost one boy his spleen and possibly his life. Marin needed to know what was on that drive. She needed to know why Desmond Blackwell had sent 4 men across 3 states to retrieve it, and she needed to know how they had found her in a town that did not appear on most maps. Because that was the question that had been burning in her mind since Decker walked through the diner door. How did they find her? She had been careful. She had ditched her phone in Sacramento. She had paid cash for everything. She had avoided cameras, avoided credit cards, avoided anything that could leave a digital trail. She had changed her appearance and changed her route and never stayed in one place longer than a night. And yet Decker had found her in 3 weeks, across 3 states, in a diner at the edge of a town that time had forgotten. That was not luck. That was not resources. That was information. Someone had told them where she was. At 2 in the afternoon, while her father was in conference with Sheriff Guthrie and the hospital administration, Marin slipped away from the waiting room. She found a small administrative office on the first floor, empty except for a cluttered desk and an ancient desktop computer that looked like it had not been updated since the Clinton administration. A nurse named Ruth, a kind woman with gray hair and tired eyes, had given her the password without asking questions. Ruth had seen the blood on Marin's clothes. She had seen the girl's face when they wheeled Callum into surgery. Some things did not require explanation. Marin closed the door. She locked it. She pulled the flash drive from the duffel bag and plugged it into the computer. The drive contained 3 files: a spreadsheet, a PDF, a video. She opened the spreadsheet first. It took her less than 30 seconds to understand what she was looking at. And when she did, the blood drained from her face. It was a ledger: dates, names, amounts, payments made by Desmond Blackwell to law enforcement officers, city officials, judges, and federal agents across 3 states: Oregon, Washington, Nevada. The amounts ranged from $5,000 to $200,000. The dates went back 4 years, dozens of names, some she recognized from news reports: a state senator from Washington, a Port Authority director in Seattle, a DEA supervisor in Portland. Then a name jumped off the screen and hit her like a fist to the stomach: Detective Raymond Whitford, Pinewood County Sheriff's Department, monthly payments of $3,000, 4 years running. Last payment dated 6 days ago. Marin stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Detective Whitford, the tired-looking man with the nicotine stain on his finger who had arrived at the hospital to take her statement. The man who was at this very moment investigating the stabbing at Rosie's diner. The man who had access to every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every detail of the case. He was on Desmond Blackwell's payroll. Everything Whitford learned went straight back to Blackwell. Every move the police made, Blackwell would know about before it happened. Every piece of evidence they gathered, Blackwell would have time to counter or destroy. The investigation was compromised from the inside. Marin kept scrolling. The second name was worse: Brennan Holt. Prospect Steel Angels MC, Northern Nevada chapter. Payments of $10,000 quarterly, 18 months. Marin's hands stopped moving on the keyboard. Brennan, she knew him, 22 years old, eager. One of the new prospects her father had been grooming for full membership. He had been at the clubhouse in Reno the night she left. He had been one of the men assigned to watch over her during the day, to escort her to school and back to make sure she was safe. He knew her habits. He knew her favorite places. He knew the bus routes she had mentioned wanting to explore someday, the places she had talked about visiting when she was old enough to travel on her own. He had fed her location to Blackwell's people. He was the reason Decker had found her in a diner in a town that nobody had ever heard of. The betrayal hit her like ice water. For a moment, she could not breathe. The walls of the small office seemed to close in around her. The hum of the ancient computer became a roar in her ears. Then the moment passed. Marin closed her eyes. She counted to 10. She breathed. She had been trained for this. Not formally, not with lessons and exercises, but through 16 years of watching her father navigate a world where loyalty was currency and betrayal was paid for in blood. She knew how this worked. She knew what happened to traitors in the world of the Steel Angels. They disappeared. A logging road somewhere in the mountains. A shallow grave. A body that was never found. That was what her father would do if she told him about Brennan. It was what any club president would do. Blood for blood. The books balanced with a body. But Marin was not her father, and she was not going to let Brennan's betrayal destroy the evidence that could bring down Desmond Blackwell. She opened the PDF financial routing numbers. Shell companies. Wire transfers totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. This was the digital skeleton of Blackwell's money laundering operation. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, Switzerland. Corporate structures designed to hide the flow of dirty money through legitimate businesses. This was not just evidence. This was a bomb that could blow Desmond Blackwell's empire to pieces if it was delivered to the right people in the right way. Marin did not open the video file. She had seen enough. She ejected the flash drive and slipped it into the front pocket of her jeans. She closed the files on the computer and deleted the browsing history, though she suspected it would not matter much on a machine this old. Then she sat in the quiet office and thought. Her first instinct was to go to her father, to show him the ledger, to point out Brennan's name, to watch Silas's face darken with the particular fury he reserved for traitors. She knew exactly what would happen next. Brennan would be taken somewhere quiet. He would confess, and then he would vanish. But if that happened, the evidence would be tainted. Any lawyer Blackwell hired would argue that the flash drive had been fabricated, that the Steel Angels had created false evidence to frame his client after torturing a confession out of a prospect. The chain of custody would be compromised. The whole case would collapse. The only way to use this evidence properly was to deliver it clean, to the FBI, through proper channels, with documentation that would hold up in a federal courtroom, which meant Brennan needed to confess on the record, and he needed to do it without anyone laying a hand on him. Marin stood up from the desk. She had a plan. She found Brennan in the hospital cafeteria. He was sitting alone at a corner table picking at a sandwich that he clearly had no intention of eating. His prospect cut looked like it did not fit him properly, hanging loose on his shoulders like borrowed clothes. His eyes were nervous, darting to every door, every window, every person who walked past. The eyes of a man who knew he was guilty and was waiting to be caught. Marin walked over and sat down across from him. Brennan looked up. His face went pale. "Hey, Marin," he tried to smile. It did not reach his eyes. "Glad you are okay. We were all worried about you, were you?" She kept her voice flat, conversational, the voice of someone making small talk, not someone about to detonate a bomb. "Of course. You are the president's daughter. Everyone was looking for you. That must have been difficult." Marin tilted her head slightly. 3 weeks across 3 states. Lots of ground to cover. Brennan's Adam's apple bobbed. "We had people everywhere. Your dad called in every favor he had, and yet Decker found me first." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Marin watched the ripples cross Brennan's face. Fear, guilt, the desperate calculation of a man trying to figure out how much she knew. "That was bad luck," Brennan said. His voice was not steady anymore. "Wrong place, wrong time. You know how it is? I know exactly how it is." Marin leaned forward. She placed both hands flat on the table palms down the way her father did when he was about to deliver a verdict. I know that you have been receiving $10,000 every quarter for the past 18 months. I know that the money came from Desmond Blackwell through a shell company registered in Nevada. I know that you were the one who told them where I was. Brennan's face crumbled. The mask fell away all at once, and beneath it was nothing but naked terror. His mouth opened and closed. His hands started to shake. I do not know what you are talking about. You are a bad liar, Brennan. You always were. Marin reached into her pocket and pulled out her prepaid phone. She placed it on the table between them, the screen facing up. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to tell me everything. How they recruited you, how much they paid you, how you communicated with them, everything. And if I do not, then I walk out of this cafeteria and I tell my father everything I just told you. She let the words hang in the air. Brennan knew what that meant. Everyone in the Steel Angels knew what happened to traitors. There would be no trial, no appeal. Just a long ride into the mountains and a hole in the ground that no one would ever find. Or Marin continued, you talk to me, you tell me everything. And maybe, just maybe, you get to walk away from this. Not as a Steel Angel, not as anything close, but alive. Do you understand what I am offering you? Brennan stared at her. He was 22 years old. He had joined the club because he wanted to belong to something bigger than himself. He had taken the money because it was easy, because Blackwell's people had promised him that no one would get hurt, because he had convinced himself that feeding them information about the president's daughter was not really betrayal if nothing bad happened to her. But something bad had happened. A 17-year-old kid was in a hospital bed with a 40% chance of survival because Brennan had sold out a girl who trusted him. The weight of that settled onto his shoulders, and Marin watched him crack. They said nobody would get hurt. His voice was barely a whisper. He spoke through his fingers, his hands covering his face. They said they would grab the bag and let you go. I did not know about the knife. I did not know about any of it. Tell me everything, Marin said. And she pressed record. It took 27 minutes. Brennan confessed to everything. The initial approach by one of Blackwell's intermediaries at a bar in Reno. The first payment deposited into a bank account that Brennan had opened under a false name. The phone calls, always from burner phones, always brief and businesslike. The questions about Marin's routines, her habits, her favorite places. And finally the call 3 weeks ago when Brennan had reported that Marin had left the clubhouse in the middle of the night with a duffel bag and a bus ticket. He had not known where she was going, but he had known the general direction, and that had been enough. Blackwell's people had tracked the Greyhound routes, monitored the bus stations, and eventually found her in Portland. They had followed her to Oregon. They had waited for the right moment. And then Decker had walked into a diner with a knife. When Brennan finished, Marin stopped the recording. She looked at the broken young man across the table from her. 22 years old, his whole life ahead of him, and he had traded it for $40,000 and the promise that no one would get hurt. You are going to disappear, Marin said. Tonight, before my father finds out. You are going to get on a bus and go somewhere far away, and you are never going to contact anyone from the club again. Do you understand? Brennan nodded. His eyes were wet. What about the recording? The recording goes to the FBI, along with everything else on that flash drive. It is going to bring down Blackwell and everyone who ever took a dollar from him, including Detective Whitford. Brennan's head snapped up. Whitford? The cop. He is on the same ledger you are. $3,000 a month for 4 years. Brennan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost, but not quite. We are all bought, he said. The whole system. Everyone is bought. Not everyone, Marin said. She thought of Callum, the boy with the dish rag, the boy who had stepped in front of a knife for a girl he had never met. Not everyone. She stood up from the table. You have until midnight. After that, I cannot protect you. Brennan nodded. He did not thank her. He did not apologize. He just sat there staring at his untouched sandwich as Marin walked away. She found Colt in the hallway outside the cafeteria. Colt was her father's sergeant-at-arms, a wiry man in his 40s with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin. He had been with the Steel Angels for 23 years. He had been at Marin's christening. He had taught her how to ride a motorcycle when she was 12 years old. And he was, Marin knew, absolutely loyal to the club. But right now she needed him to be loyal to her. We need to talk, Marin said. Colt raised an eyebrow. His eyes were sharp, assessing. He had been watching her since her father arrived, and he had noticed the change in her. The way she carried herself, the way she moved, the way she spoke. This was not the same girl who had run away 3 weeks ago. What do you need? Brennan is a traitor. He sold my location to Blackwell's people. That is how they found me. Colt's face did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A cold, deadly calculation. Does your father know? No. And he is not going to. Not yet. Colt was silent for a long moment, his jaw tightened. Marin, that is not your call to make. Yes, it is. She met his eyes. She did not flinch. Brennan confessed. I have it on tape. 27 minutes of him explaining exactly how Blackwell recruited him and exactly what information he passed along. That confession is going to be evidence in a federal case. But if my father gets his hands on Brennan first, the confession becomes worthless. Any lawyer will argue it was coerced. Colt's expression flickered. He understood. What do you want me to do? Brennan is leaving tonight, before midnight. You are going to be sure he gets on a bus and goes somewhere far away. No violence, no threats, just a one-way ticket and a very strong suggestion that he never come back. And after we deal with the rest of it, but Brennan walks away breathing. That is the condition. Colt studied her for a long moment. He had known Marin since she was a baby. He had watched her grow up in the shadow of her father's empire, protected and sheltered, and kept away from the ugly realities of club business. He had always assumed she would stay that way. A princess in a tower, beautiful and untouchable, waiting for the day when she would be married off to cement some alliance or reward some loyal soldier. But the girl standing in front of him now was not a princess. She was a commander. All right, Colt said finally. I will handle it. Thank you. Marin turned to walk away. Then she stopped. One more thing. Brennan is not the only traitor. Detective Whitford is on Blackwell's payroll, $3,000 a month for 4 years. Colt's face darkened. That explains a lot. It means we cannot trust the local police. Everything goes federal. FBI only. Make sure my father understands that. Colt nodded. Anything else? Marin thought of the flash drive in her pocket, the ledger, the shell companies, the web of corruption that stretched across 3 states. Yes, get me a meeting with my father. Tonight, after Brennan is gone. I have a plan. Colt almost smiled. I will set it up. He walked away toward the cafeteria where Brennan was still sitting alone, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Marin watched him go, then she headed back upstairs. She had one more thing to do before the day was over. She sat with Callum in the ICU that afternoon. The room was small and white and filled with the soft beeping of machines. Monitors tracked his heart rate, his blood pressure, his oxygen levels. A ventilator helped him breathe. IV lines snaked into his arms, delivering fluids and medications and the blood that Silas's people had shipped in from Portland. He looked impossibly young against the white sheets, impossibly fragile. The tubes and wires made him seem less like a person and more like a science project, a collection of systems being kept alive by external intervention. But his chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was steady. Steady was alive. Marin pulled a chair close to the bed. She sat down. She took his hand. His fingers were cold but warming. The skin was rough with calluses. The hands of a boy who worked with tools and grease and engines. The hands of a boy who had fought for her. I do not know if you can hear me, Marin said quietly. The monitors beeped. The ventilator hissed. Outside the window, the afternoon sun was starting its descent toward the western ridge. But I want you to know that what you did matters. It was not wasted. You stood up for a stranger, and that stranger is going to make it count. She squeezed his hand gently. I found out some things today. Bad things. There are people involved in this that are supposed to be trustworthy. Cops. People in my father's own club. They are all bought. They are all part of the same rotten system that sent Decker after me. The monitors beeped steadily. Callum's face remained peaceful, slack with the artificial sleep of medical sedation. But you are not part of that system. You never were. You just saw a girl in trouble and you moved. No angle, no motive, no calculation, just courage. Marin felt the burn of tears behind her eyes. She blinked them back. I'm going to fix this, Callum. I promise. I am going to take down the people who did this to you. And when you wake up, it is going to be over. All of it. She thought she felt his fingers tighten around hers. Just slightly. Just enough. She chose to believe it was real. The door opened behind her. Lenore Wren stepped into the room. She was wearing fresh clothes, now a simple blouse and slacks that one of the Steel Angel's wives had brought from a store in town. Her hair was combed, her face was washed, but her eyes were still red from crying, and she moved with the careful, fragile steps of someone who was holding herself together through sheer force of will. May I sit? Lenore asked. Of course. Marin started to stand to give the chair to Callum's mother, but Lenore waved her back down. She pulled another chair from the corner and placed it on the opposite side of the bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there watching Callum breathe, listening to the rhythm of the machines that were keeping him alive. Then Lenore broke the silence. He used to be afraid of everything when he was little. Her voice was soft, eastbound, distant, the voice of someone reaching back through years of memories. Thunderstorms, the dark, the big kids at school. He would hide in his closet during storms wrapped in a blanket with a flashlight and a stack of comic books. Marin listened. She did not interrupt. His father leaving broke something in him. Lenore's hands twisted in her lap. I think he blamed himself. Children do that. They think everything is their fault, even when it is not. What happened to his father? Just walked out one morning. No warning, no explanation. Left the car in the driveway with a blown engine like a final insult. Lenore's voice was steady, but there was old pain beneath the steadiness. Callum spent years trying to fix that car. Every Saturday, he would be out there with his tools and his manuals, taking the engine apart and putting it back together. Did it ever run? No. But he never stopped trying. Lenore looked at her son's face. The peaceful expression, the slow rise and fall of his chest. That is who he is. He does not know how to quit on something, even when the something has already quit on him. Marin thought about the boy in the diner, the way he had vaulted over the counter with nothing but a dish rag in his hand, the way he had planted his feet on that checkered floor and refused to move. He is the bravest person I have ever met, Marin said. Lenore smiled. It was a small smile, fragile but real. He would not believe you if you told him that. He does not think of himself that way. He thinks he is invisible, that nobody sees him, that he does not matter. He matters, Marin said. She gripped Callum's hand tighter. He matters more than he knows. They sat together in the quiet room watching over the boy who had stepped in front of a knife for a stranger. Outside, the sun continued its descent. The shadows lengthened. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. And somewhere in the depths of his artificial sleep, Callum Wren dreamed of engines turning over and broken things becoming whole. At 6:30 that evening, Marin heard the footsteps in the hallway. She was still in Callum's room, sitting by his bedside, her hands still wrapped around his. Lenore had gone to get coffee from the cafeteria, leaving Marin alone with the beeping monitors and the hiss of the ventilator. The footsteps were wrong. She heard them before she consciously registered what was wrong about them. Sharp, crisp, the click of hard-soled dress shoes on linoleum. Hospital staff wore soft-soled shoes, sneakers, clogs, practical footwear designed for 12-hour shifts on hard floors. These shoes were Italian leather, polished, expensive. Marin's hand slipped out of Callum's. She stood slowly, quietly moving to the side of the door where she would be hidden when it opened. The footsteps stopped outside the room. Through the narrow window in the door, Marin could see two figures in hospital scrubs. A man and a woman, both in their 30s, both with the calm, professional demeanor of medical staff. But their scrubs were wrong. The creases were too sharp, too fresh, like they had just been removed from packaging. And beneath the loose scrub pants of the man on the right, Marin could see a bulge at the ankle. A holster. Cleaners. Blackwell had sent cleaners to finish what Decker started. Marin's heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. Razor sharp. She had maybe 10 seconds before that door opened. She pulled out her prepaid phone and typed a rapid text to Colt. Room 304, 2 hostiles. Now. Then she pressed her back against the wall and waited. The door opened. The woman entered first. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Dead professional eyes that belonged in a war zone, not a hospital corridor. She was carrying a clipboard, but her other hand was at her side, ready to reach for whatever weapon was hidden beneath her scrubs. She did not see Marin pressed against the wall behind the door. The man followed. Bigger, broader, the one with the ankle holster. His eyes swept the room, taking in the bed, the monitors, the apparently sleeping patient. He did not check behind the door either. Marin stepped out of the shadows. "You are not nurses," she said. Both cleaners spun toward her. The woman's hand moved toward her waistband, but the door burst open behind them. Colt came through first, fast and low, catching the male cleaner around the waist and driving him into the wall. Hendricks, a massive nomad with arms like oak branches, was half a second behind. He grabbed the woman's reaching hand and twisted, forcing her to her knees. The whole thing took 8 seconds. 8 seconds and both cleaners were on the floor, zip-tied, a suppressed pistol skittering across the linoleum toward Marin's feet. She picked up the pistol with the hem of her shirt, careful not to leave fingerprints. She checked the chamber. Loaded, ready to fire. They had come to kill a boy in a hospital bed. A boy who was unconscious, defenseless, surrounded by machines keeping him alive. She looked down at the cleaners. The woman's face was pressed into the linoleum. The man was struggling against Colt's weight, but it was futile. Marin pulled out her phone. She had been recording since the moment the door opened. She stopped the recording. Clear video, faces visible, weapon in frame, timestamp in the corner. Evidence. "Hold them for the FBI," Marin said. Her voice was cold, controlled. Not the local police, not Detective Whitford. FBI only. Colt looked up at her from where he was pinning the male cleaner to the floor. "You got it." Hendricks was already pulling out his phone to make the call. Marin stepped back and looked at Callum, still asleep in his bed, oblivious to how close he had come to never waking up. They had almost killed him. While he lay helpless, while the machines breathed for him, they had come to put a bullet in his head and walk away. The fury that rose in Marin was cold and clean and absolutely clear. This was not over. Not by a long way. She met with her father at 9 o'clock that evening. They sat in a small conference room on the hospital's second floor. Silas on one side of the table, Marin on the other. Colt stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. The flash drive sat between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marin had spent the past hour laying out everything she had discovered. The ledger, the payments, Detective Whitford, Brennan, the cleaners who had come to kill Callum in his hospital bed. Silas had listened without interruption. His face had grown darker with every revelation. By the time Marin finished, his hands were clenched into fists on the table, the knuckles white with suppressed rage. "Brennan," he said. The word was a growl, low, dangerous, a prospect I trusted, a man who broke bread at my table. "He is gone," Marin said. "I sent him away. Night before you found out." Silas's eyes snapped to her face. "You did what I sent him away." He confessed on tape. 27 minutes. Everything Blackwell's lawyers need to know, that the evidence was obtained legitimately. "You let a traitor walk away." Silas's voice was rising. "A man who sold out my daughter, who got a boy stabbed, and you let him walk away." "I saved the evidence," Marin shot back. "If you had gotten your hands on him first, any confession would be worthless. Coerced, inadmissible. Blackwell's lawyers would tear it apart. That is not your call to make." "Yes, it is," Marin leaned forward. She met her father's eyes. She did not flinch. "You told me to be strong. You told me to think like a leader. You told me that the club survives because we are smarter than the people who want to destroy us. Well, I am being smart. I am thinking like a leader. And I am telling you that the way to destroy Desmond Blackwell is not with fists and shallow graves. It is with evidence. Clean evidence. Evidence that will put him in prison for the rest of his life." Silas stared at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room was thick enough to cut. Then slowly the fury in Silas's eyes began to fade. Something else took its place. Something that might have been pride. "What do you have in mind?" Marin tapped the flash drive. "This contains everything. The ledger, the shell companies, the money trail, but delivering it to the FBI is not enough. Blackwell will lawyer up. He will delay. He will destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. By the time any case goes to trial, he will have covered his tracks. So what do? We make sure there is no time to cover tracks. We catch him in the act. We deliver him to the FBI with so much evidence that no lawyer in the world can get him off. How Marin smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Rafferty. Decker, she corrected herself. We used Decker to lure Blackwell out of hiding. Silas raised an eyebrow. You think Blackwell will come himself? I think he has to. The flash drive is worth more than money to him. It is proof of every crime he has committed for the past 4 years. He cannot trust anyone else to retrieve it. He has to see it with his own eyes. And where do we catch him? Marin pulled out her phone. She had spent the afternoon studying satellite images and topographical maps. The old sawmill off Route 4, abandoned since 2003. 2 main buildings, clear sight lines, limited exits. Perfect for an ambush. An ambush! Silas's voice was flat. You are talking about a military operation. I am talking about justice. Marin met his eyes. We set the trap. We draw him in. And when he shows up, we do not kill him. We do not beat him. We document everything. Then we call the FBI and hand him over. Silas was silent for a long moment. Colt shifted by the door. What about his people? Colt asked. Blackwell does not travel alone. He has got private security. Ex-military, the kind of men who shoot first. We handle them, Marin said. Floodlights, beanbag rounds, non-lethal takedowns. Everyone goes home breathing. Everyone goes to prison, not to the morgue. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, as if he were seeing someone he had never met before. Beanbag rounds, he repeated. Callum did not stab anyone. Marin's voice cracked for the first time. He did not pull a gun. He did not throw anyone off a cliff. He walked into a fight with armed men carrying nothing but a dish rag. And he won. Not because he was stronger, because he was better. He was better than them. She paused. She took a breath. If we go out there and beat Decker to death or throw Blackwell in a river, we betray everything that boy represents. We prove that standing up for what is right does not matter. That in the end, the biggest fist wins. Silas was silent. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere in the distance, a monitor beeped. Non-lethal, Silas said finally. His voice was quiet, heavy. Fine. But if they shoot first, we finish it, Fair Marin said. Colt straightened by the door. I will assemble the team. Best shooters we have. Briggs, Hendricks, the nomads from Montana. Do it, Silas said. He looked at Marin. How do we get Blackwell to the sawmill? Decker, Marin said. We have him. He has been in custody since this afternoon. Silas's eyebrows rose. You have been busy. I have been motivated. Silas almost smiled. Almost, but not quite. All right, let us talk to Decker. They brought Decker to the conference room at 10 o'clock. He had been in the hospital basement for most of the day, watched over by 2 of Silas's most trusted men. His face was bruised from the fight at the diner. His wrists were zip-tied behind his back. But his dead eyes were still empty, still measuring everyone in the room like a predator, calculating the odds. Marin sat across from him. She laid out his options with the cold precision of a lawyer presenting evidence. Option 1, Decker refused to cooperate. In that case, he would be handed over to the FBI along with the flash drive and the video of the cleaners. He would be charged as a co-conspirator in attempted murder, conspiracy racketeering, and a dozen other federal crimes. 25 to life minimum. Option 2, Decker cooperated. He called Blackwell. He told him that he had the girl and the flash drive, that the situation was under control, that Blackwell needed to come to the sawmill at midnight to collect his property in person. In exchange for his cooperation, Marin would recommend leniency to the FBI, a reduced sentence, protective custody, a chance at something resembling a life. Decker listened. His dead eyes did not change, but something flickered behind them. Fear, maybe, or calculation, the gears of survival turning. Why should I trust you, Decker asked. His voice was flat, oily. Even now it made Marin's skin crawl. You should not, Marin said, but you should trust the math. If you do not cooperate, you go to prison for the rest of your life. If you do cooperate, you might get out in 10 years, maybe less. Decker was silent. The seconds ticked by. Then he laughed, the same cold, dry sound she remembered from the diner. All right, princess, you win. Give me a phone. Marin slid a burner phone across the table. Decker made the call. It took less than 3 minutes to convince Blackwell that the situation was under control. The girl was contained. The flash drive was secure. All Blackwell had to do was come to the sawmill at midnight and collect his property. Blackwell agreed. Marin ended the recording she had been making of the call. More evidence, more documentation, another nail in the coffin. Decker smiled at her with his dead eyes. "You are good at this," he said. "Too good for a little princess playing gangster." Marin stood up from the table. "I am not playing." She walked out of the room without looking back. At 11 o'clock, the convoy left the hospital. 20 motorcycles running dark, their engines muffled as much as possible. They took the back roads, avoiding Route 9, avoiding anywhere they might be spotted by Whitford or his deputies. Marin rode in a van with Colt and Hendricks. She had insisted on being there. Silas had argued. She had won. This was her operation. She was going to see it through. The old Pinewood sawmill sat on a high bluff overlooking the Deschutes River fork, a skeletal ruin of rusted corrugated metal and rotting timber that had been surrendering to the Oregon elements for 2 decades. The main warehouse was a vast cathedral-like space, 2 stories of open floor beneath a lattice of steel catwalks and overhead beams. The roof was half gone, stripped away by winter storms letting in the sky and the rain. Marin arrived at 9:40, hours early. She walked through the abandoned building with a flashlight mapping the space in her mind. Catwalks, machinery positions, blind spots, choke points. She identified positions for 6 high-intensity construction lamps, each capable of throwing 14,000 lumens. She calculated sight lines. She marked positions for the nomads with their beanbag-loaded shotguns. Colt watched her work with something approaching awe. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Marin did not look up from the map she was sketching on a piece of scrap paper. "I have been watching my whole life. I just never had a reason to use it before." By 11:30, the trap was set. The nomads were in position, hidden behind machinery and in the shadows of the catwalks. The floodlights were rigged in the rafters, wired to a single switch that Marin would hold from her position 30 feet above the floor. Each man carried a shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds. Each man also carried a sidearm with hollow points in case the world stopped listening to good intentions. Silas took his position at 11:50. He stood alone in the center of the warehouse, a solitary figure in the vast dark space lit by a single work lamp that cast his shadow across the debris like a sundial marking the final hours. Decker sat tied to a chair behind him, gagged and bruised, a prop in the final act. Marin climbed to the catwalk. The metal rungs were slick with rain and rust. She crouched behind the railing, the floodlight switch in her left hand, her phone in her right. She looked down at her father standing alone in the dark. If this went wrong, he would be first in the crossfire. The fear was there, cold and real and pressing against her chest. She pushed it down, locked it away. There would be time for fear later. Right now, there was only the plan. Colt's voice crackled in her earpiece. 2 SUVs approaching. Black Cadillac Escalades. Armored. Military grade. Marin's stomach dropped. She had planned for 4 men, maybe 5. Not armored vehicles and professional soldiers. "Hold positions," she whispered into her radio. "Nobody moves until I say." The Escalades rolled into the loading bay like hearses, dark and deliberate. They stopped 20 yards from where Silas stood. 6 men stepped out. Not street criminals, not thugs like Decker and his crew. These were private military contractors. They moved with fluid, lethal economy. Checking corners. Scanning darkness. Suppressed carbines at the low ready. Night vision goggles atop their heads. Professionals. The kind of men who had done this 100 times before. Then Desmond Blackwell stepped out. He was a disappointing figure. Small, slight, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than Lenore Wren made in 6 months. Thin hands, wire-rimmed glasses, the fastidious manner of a man who viewed the world as a series of transactions. He held a black umbrella over his head, fussy and precise, even in a ruin. "You are not Decker," Blackwell said. His voice was bored, annoyed, like he had been called away from something important to deal with a minor inconvenience. "Decker is indisposed," Silas rumbled. "I am the father," Blackwell sighed. He checked his cuticles. "The biker. I was hoping to avoid all this. It is so theatrical." He gestured to his men with a lazy wave. The casual, dismissive gesture of a man ordering a drink at a restaurant. "Kill him. Find the girl, find the drive, burn the building. I have a flight to catch. 6 rifles rose. 6 red laser sights converged on Silas's chest. Marin's hand tightened on the switch. Now, she said. She threw the switch. The warehouse exploded with light. 84,000 lumens erupted from the rafters like the wrath of God. The warehouse transformed in an instant from darkness to blinding white. 6 construction lamps, each capable of illuminating a football field, poured concentrated light directly downward onto the killing floor, where Desmond Blackwell and his mercenaries stood. The effect was immediate and devastating. The mercenaries had adjusted their eyes to near total darkness. They had been operating on instinct, and training their pupils dilated their night vision goggles ready to deploy at the first sign of trouble. The wall of light that hit them was physically painful. 2 stumbled backward, hands flying to their faces. One dropped to a knee, his carbine swinging wildly. Another ripped off his night vision goggles, which had caught the reflected glare, and turned into instruments of additional disorientation. Marin watched from the catwalk, her hand still on the switch, her heart hammering against her ribs. The plan was working. For exactly 3 seconds, the plan was working perfectly. Then the mercenaries adapted. These were not street criminals. These were not thugs who had learned to fight in bar brawls and back alleys. These were combat veterans, men who had served in war zones where adaptation meant survival and hesitation meant death. Their training kicked in through the shock, overriding pain and confusion with muscle memory and discipline. 2 of them dropped behind the armored escalades and began returning fire. Controlled, aimed bursts. The suppressed carbines made a sound like angry whispers, sharp cracks that echoed through the vast space and sent sparks flying from the steel machinery. The nomads moved from their positions, emerging from behind rusted equipment and shadowed corners. Hendricks came around a massive bandsaw housing his shotgun up and fired 2 beanbag rounds at the nearest mercenary. The rounds caught the man square in the chest, and he went down hard, gasping. The wind knocked out of him. But the mercenaries were spreading out, finding cover, turning the ambush into a firefight. A burst of suppressed fire stitched across the catwalk railing 10 feet from where Marin crouched. She threw herself flat, pressing her body against the wet metal grating, her phone skittering across the catwalk and disappearing through a gap in the railing. Below her, chaos unfolded. Briggs, the former Marine Corps sniper, was advancing along the east wall when a round caught him in the thigh. She heard the cry of pain, saw him go down, saw him drag himself behind a steel column with blood soaking through his jeans. His jaw was clenched, his hands pressing against the wound, but he was still moving, still fighting. Silas charged a mercenary who had come around the escalade. 240 pounds of fury propelled by a lifetime of violence and a father's rage. He lowered his shoulder and hit the man like a freight train, slamming him into the armored vehicle hard enough to dent the reinforced panel. But the mercenary fired as he was being hit. A round tore through Silas's leather cut and carved a furrow across his left shoulder. Blood sprayed in a dark arc. Silas roared not in pain, but in anger. He grabbed the stunned mercenary by the tactical vest and hurled him into the concrete floor with bone-cracking force. Marin watched her father fighting, bleeding, and felt the plan slipping away from her. This was not supposed to happen. The lights were supposed to blind them long enough for the nomads to move in and end it quickly. Beanbag rounds, zip ties, no casualties. But Briggs was bleeding, Silas was bleeding, and 2 mercenaries had found cover behind a concrete pillar near the loading bay, laying down disciplined fire that had Colt and 2 other nomads pinned behind a rusted bandsaw housing. The situation was stuck. A stalemate in a fight that needed to end fast. Marin looked around desperately. The catwalk gave her a view of the entire warehouse floor, but it also made her a target. If one of the mercenaries looked up, if they realized she was the one controlling the lights, she would be dead in seconds. Then she saw it. The 2 mercenaries behind the concrete pillar were directly below her position on the catwalk. They were focused on the nomads in front of them, trading fire, keeping their attention on the threats they could see. They did not know she was above them. Marin crawled along the wet metal grating, moving slowly, silently, keeping her body low. The catwalk groaned softly under her weight, but the sound was lost in the chaos of the firefight below. She reached the nearest floodlight. The housing was hot, radiating heat through the metal casing. She grabbed it with both hands, ignoring the burn, and twisted. The beam swung across the warehouse wall and hit the two mercenaries full in the face from their unprotected flank. They flinched. One raised his arm to shield his eyes. A half-second opening. Colt came around the pillar like a landslide, clotheslining the first mercenary with a forearm that dropped him instantly. Hendricks was right behind, swinging his baton against the second man's weapon arm, then his knee, then the side of his helmet. The mercenary crumpled. Silence descended on the warehouse. The fight was over. Less than 90 seconds from start to finish, but it had felt like an hour. Marin scrambled down the catwalk ladder, her hands slick with sweat and rust. She hit the warehouse floor at a run, her boots splashing through puddles of rainwater that had leaked through the ruined roof. "Briggs," she said into her radio, "status, through and through." Colt's voice came back steady despite the chaos. "Missed the artery. He is going to make it, but he needs a hospital. Now, get him out. Take the van. Go." Two nomads were already lifting Briggs between them, carrying him toward the loading bay. He was conscious, his jaw clenched against the pain, one hand raised in a fist as he passed the other men. A salute, still fighting. The nomads returned the gesture as Briggs disappeared into the darkness outside. Marin watched him go and felt the weight of command settle into her bones. She had ordered men into a fight. One of them was bleeding because of her plan. That weight would never fully lift. She would carry it for the rest of her life. But she did not have time to dwell on it. Not yet. She turned to find her father. Silas was standing over Desmond Blackwell, who had not run, had not fought, had simply stood beside his Escalade in paralyzed disbelief as his entire security team was dismantled around him. His expensive overcoat was spattered with rain and concrete dust. His wire-rimmed glasses were crooked on his face. His umbrella lay forgotten in a puddle. He looked like a man whose world had been rearranged without his permission. Silas grabbed him by the collar of his overcoat and lifted him off his feet. Blackwell tried to speak. His voice came out as a squeak. "You cannot do this. I have immunity. I have files. I know people." "Shut up," Silas said. Not loudly, just final. He dragged Blackwell across the warehouse floor through the loading bay doors out into the rain. Marin followed. The night air was cold and wet and smelled of pine and rotting wood. The rain had not stopped. It streamed down in silver sheets, catching the glow of the work lights inside the warehouse and turning the world into a study in gray and shadow. Silas dragged Blackwell to the edge of the bluff. The Deschutes River fork churned 80 feet below, swollen by days of rain. The water was dark and fast and merciless. The sound of it rose up through the darkness, a constant churning roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The drop was sheer. Rocks jutted from the cliff face at irregular intervals. Anyone who went over would hit them on the way down, and if they survived the fall, the current would finish the job. Silas pushed Blackwell to the very edge. The smaller man stumbled, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet grass. He caught himself at the last moment, his arms windmilling, and looked down at the black water below. "Please," Blackwell said. The word came out thin and high, stripped of every pretense. The naked sound of a man who had finally encountered something his money could not fix. "Please, I can pay you anything. Name a price." Colt appeared at Silas's side. He looked at the river, then at Blackwell, then at Silas. "River is deep," Colt said quietly. "Current is fast. Nobody would ever find him." Silas stood at the edge of the bluff. Rain streamed down his face, mixing with the blood that was still seeping from the wound on his shoulder. His beard was plastered to his skin. His eyes were dark with a fury that Marin had never seen before. He looked at the man who had sent killers after his daughter, the man who had ordered a 16-year-old girl brought in or killed over a flash drive, the man whose greed had put a knife in the side of a 17-year-old kid who was guilty of nothing except courage. He thought about the river. He thought about how easy it would be. One push, a short fall, the cold water and the current. No body, no trial, no lawyers, no appeals. Just gravity and the river and the rain washing everything clean. The old Silas would have done it. The man he had been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would not have hesitated. Blood for blood. The books balanced with a body. That was the code. That was the way the world worked when you lived outside the lines. One push. That was all it would take. Then he heard the footsteps behind him. Light footsteps, quick and sure, splashing through the puddles. Marin appeared at the edge of the loading bay. She was soaked, her short hair plastered to her forehead, her face pale in the rain. She had a cut on her palm from the floodlight housing. Blood was running between her fingers, mixing with the rainwater, dripping onto the muddy ground. She walked toward her father. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and exactly why. She stopped 3 feet from the edge. Daddy. Silas did not look at her. His jaw was locked. His muscles were rigid. The rain ran into his eyes and down his beard. Daddy, look at me. He turned his head, just enough to see her. Marin met his eyes. The boy in that hospital, she said. Her voice was steady despite the rain, despite the cold, despite everything. He did not kill anyone. He did not break any bones. He did not throw anyone off a cliff. He walked into a fight with armed men carrying nothing but a dish rag. And he won. Not because he was stronger, because he was better. He was better than them. And he was better than this. She gestured at the scene around them, the bluff, the river, the weeping man at the edge. If you throw him off that cliff, you prove every person who ever called you a thug, right? Every cop, every prosecutor, every reporter who said the Steel Angels are just criminals with motorcycles. You proved them all right. Silas's grip on Blackwell's collar tightened. His knuckles were white. And you proved Callum wrong, Marin continued. You proved that standing up, doing the right thing, bleeding for a stranger, none of it matters. Because in the end, the biggest fist wins. In the end, the man with the most muscle gets to decide who lives and who dies. And if that is true, then what Callum did was pointless. He almost died for nothing. Silas stared at her. His eyes were burning. Not from the rain, from something deeper, something tearing through walls he had built over decades. He ordered them to kill you. His voice was raw, broken in places he did not know could break. He sat in his car and said the words, "Kill her, like you were nothing, like my baby girl was a line item on a ledger." "I know," Marin said, her voice cracked, just slightly, but she held his gaze. "And that is why this has to go to court. That is why the world has to hear those words. Not in a river, not in the dark, in a courtroom, on the record, where it counts." She took a step closer, close enough to touch him. "If you do this, I lose you. Not because you go to prison, because I will never be able to look at you the same way again." Her voice broke completely now. Tears were mixing with the rain on her face. "And I just got you back, Daddy. I just started seeing the man I used to believe in, the man who built something real, who lived by a code, who protected people who could not protect themselves." She reached out and put her hand on his arm, the arm that was holding Blackwell over the edge. "Do not take that away from me. Please." The silence between them was absolute. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Silas looked at his daughter, the girl he had raised, the girl he had protected, the girl who had run away from everything he had built because she wanted to be more than a princess in a kingdom of chrome and leather. He looked at Blackwell, whimpering at the edge of the cliff. He looked at the river, dark and hungry and waiting. He released his grip. Blackwell collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping, curling into himself like a child waking from a nightmare. His expensive coat was ruined. His glasses were gone, fallen into the mud. He wept without sound, his body shaking. Silas stepped back from the edge. He turned away from the river and faced his daughter. The rain ran between them like a curtain. "Call the sheriff," Silas said. His voice was quiet now, drained, the voice of a man who had just fought the hardest battle of his life and won by not throwing a single punch. "Tell him we have a present for the FBI." Marin pulled out the prepaid phone that Colt had given her to replace the one she had lost on the catwalk. She dialed the Portland FBI field office's 24-hour tip line. She identified herself. She described the money laundering operation. She listed the contents of the flash drive. She gave the coordinates of the sawmill. She told them to send a team quickly. She answered 3 questions. She hung up. 20 minutes, she said. Maybe less. Silas nodded. He looked at Colt. "Get the men ready to move. We are gone before the feds arrive." Colt hesitated. "What about him?" He nodded toward Blackwell, still curled on the ground. Marin walked over to the fallen man. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive, the small black rectangle that had started all of this. She crouched down beside Blackwell. He flinched away from her, his eyes wide with terror. Marin pulled a strip of duct tape from her jacket pocket. She had brought it for securing evidence. She had not expected to use it like this. She pressed the flash drive against Blackwell's forehead and taped it in place. "Hold still," she said. Would not want it to fall off. She stood up and stepped back. Blackwell lay in the mud with the flash drive taped to his head, rain streaming down his face, surrounded by the ruins of his empire. 6 mercenaries were being zip-tied and loaded into the Escalades. Decker was still in the warehouse, bound to his chair, waiting for the same fate. Marin looked at the scene and felt something she had not expected. Satisfaction. Not joy, not triumph, just the quiet, exhausted satisfaction of a job done right. "All right," Silas said. "Let us go." The Steel Angels moved out. 20 motorcycles fired up in a rippling wave of thunder. The nomads piled into the van with the wounded Briggs already on the phone with a doctor in Portland who would be waiting when they arrived. The Escalades would be left behind along with their cargo of bound mercenaries and evidence. Marin climbed into the van with Colt. She was soaked and exhausted, and her hand was still bleeding from the cut on her palm. But she was alive, and Callum was alive, and Blackwell was going to prison. She leaned her head against the cold metal wall of the van and closed her eyes. The drive back to the hospital was quiet. The rain had finally stopped by the time they arrived, leaving the world clean and washed and smelling of pine. The first hint of dawn was touching the eastern sky, turning the clouds from black to gray to pale silver. Marin walked into the hospital lobby at 6:14 in the morning. Lenore Wren was waiting for her. She looked like she had not slept. Her eyes were red. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. But when she saw Marin, something in her face changed. "Is it over?" Lenore asked. Marin nodded. "It is over. They have Blackwell in custody. The FBI is processing the evidence right now. The men who hurt Callum are going to prison for a very long time." Lenore's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Marin said. "Thank your son. He is the one who started all of this. He is the one who stood up." Lenore reached out and took Marin's hand, the one that was not bandaged. "You finished it," Lenore said. "That matters too." They stood together in the quiet lobby, 2 women bound by a boy's courage, and a night that neither of them would ever forget. Then Dr. Ashford appeared in the doorway. He looked better than he had 2 days ago, less exhausted, less worried. There was something in his face that Marin had not seen before. Hope. "His vitals stabilized overnight," Ashford said. "We are reducing the sedation. He should be waking up within the next few hours." Lenore made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Can we see him?" Marin asked. Ashford nodded. "Room 304. He is not conscious yet, but he is breathing on his own. That is a good sign." Marin and Lenore walked to the elevator together. They rode up in silence, watching the numbers climb. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a corridor that Marin had walked a dozen times in the past 2 days. Room 304 was at the end of the hall. The door was open. Sunlight was streaming through the window, casting golden rectangles across the white sheets and the white walls. The monitors were still beeping, but the rhythm had changed. Stronger, more regular. The rhythm of a body that was healing. Callum Wren lay in the bed, his face peaceful, his chest rising and falling with breaths that were his own. Marin pulled a chair close to the bed. She sat down. She took his hand, and she waited. He woke at 9:17 in the morning. The first thing Callum saw was the ceiling. White acoustic tiles dotted with tiny holes lit by sunlight instead of fluorescent panels. The second thing he noticed was the beeping, softer now, more distant. The third thing was the pain still there but muted, wrapped in cotton by the drugs flowing through his IV. He tried to move. His body protested immediately. Easy, a voice, soft, urgent, familiar in a way he could not immediately place. "Do not try to move. You have got about 40 stitches and a missing spleen. The doctor said you are supposed to lie still for at least another week." Callum blinked. He turned his head slowly, carefully, and saw her. Marin was sitting on the wide windowsill, one knee pulled to her chest. She looked different from the girl who had walked into the diner 4 nights ago. The oversized leather jacket was draped over a chair, cleaned, but still carrying a faint shadow of rust brown that no amount of detergent could fully erase. She wore a gray hoodie instead, soft and worn. Her short hair was pulled back. Her storm cloud blue eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made the room feel very small. "You are okay," Callum said. It was not a question. It was the first thought his brain produced, the thought that had been frozen in place since the moment the world went dark on the diner floor. "Yes," Marin smiled. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had allowed herself in days. "I am okay." "Because of you, did I win?" Callum's voice was a dry crackle. It hurt to speak, but the corner of his mouth turned up. Marin let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You won. You held the line and the cavalry came. They are gone, Callum. Decker, Blackwell, all of them. The FBI has them. It is over. Good." Callum's eyes drifted shut for a moment, the exhaustion pulling at him. "That is good." Another voice warm and breaking with emotion. Callum opened his eyes again. His mother was there. Lenore stood beside the bed, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had not slept in 4 days. She had barely eaten. She had worn a path in the linoleum between the waiting room and the ICU. But in this moment, with her son's eyes open and focused, she looked like a woman who had just witnessed a miracle. "Hey, Mom," Callum said. Lenore collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around him as gently as she could, pressing her face into his shoulder. Her body shook with eyes that she had held back through days of terror and prayer. "My boy." Her voice was muffled against his hospital gown. "My brave, stupid, wonderful boy." Callum winced at the pressure on his side, but he did not complain. He held his mother with his free arm and let her cry. After a while, the door opened. The air shifted the way it always did when Silas Hartley entered a space. Not because he was loud, because he was a force, and forces do not need to announce themselves. He was not wearing his cut today. Just a dark t-shirt that strained across his broad chest, heavy denim jeans, and his left arm in a sling from the shoulder wound. But he could not hide what he was. He filled the doorway like a wall. His beard was the color of iron filings. His arms were mapped with ink that told decades of stories. He carried a motorcycle helmet in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. Callum's eyes widened. "You are him," he rasped. "The dad I am." Silas's voice was quiet, almost reverent, as if he were entering a church. He walked to the bedside, his boots barely making a sound on the linoleum. He looked down at the bandages, the tubes, the fragility of a 17-year-old kid who had never been in a fight before the one that nearly killed him. Silas extended his hand. It was massive, engulfing Callum's completely. But he did not squeeze. He held the boy's hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man that size. "You saved my world, son." His voice was thick with an emotion he had spent a lifetime suppressing. "There are not words for that. There is not enough money in the world to pay for that. You gave me back my daughter." Callum looked at the big man. He felt the calluses on his palm, the rough geography of a life lived with fists and handlebars. "I just could not let them take her," he murmured. He had a knife. She was scared. It was not right. No, Silas agreed. It was not right. And most men would have run. Most men would have hid. He released Callum's hand. "You stood up." Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. He placed them on the bedside table. "My boys went by your house," he said. "We saw the Taurus in the driveway. Transmission was shot. Head gasket was blown." Callum winced. "Yeah, I was saving up. It is fixed." Silas's voice was matter of fact, as if he were commenting on the weather. "New transmission, new engine, new paint. We even fixed the AC. It runs better than the day it rolled off the lot." Callum stared at him. The car he had been trying to fix every Saturday for 8 years. The car his father had left behind like a broken promise wrapped in rusted metal. Fixed, running, whole. Then Silas reached into his other pocket and pulled out a second set of keys. Heavier. The key fob bore the silver shield of Harley-Davidson. "I figured a young man who stared down a knife deserves something with a little more soul," Silas said. "Something that understands the wind." He placed the keys in Callum's palm. "There is a 2024 Iron 883 Sportster in your garage. Matte black, custom exhaust, paid in full, insurance and registration handled." Callum looked at the keys in his hand. His throat was tight. His eyes were burning. I cannot accept this, he whispered. You are not accepting a gift, Callum. Silas's tone shifted, from warm to solemn. You are accepting a tribute. He looked at Lenore, who was watching from the other side of the bed, her eyes wide with disbelief. We set up a trust in your name this morning, Silas said. Full ride, tuition books, housing, engineering school, medical school, whatever you choose. The Steel Angels are picking up the tab. Lenore covered her mouth with both hands. A sound escaped her that was somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. Mr. Hartley, you do not have to. I do. Silas cut her off gently. His voice was firm but kind. He bled for my family, Mrs. Wren. My family will sweat for his. That is the code. He turned back to Callum. You are family now, kid. You understand. You have brothers in every state. You ever have trouble, you ever feel unsafe, you ever need anything at all, you make one call and we answer. Callum looked at his mother. She was radiant. Her exhaustion and grief had been transformed into a pride so fierce it seemed to fill the room with light. He looked at Marin, still sitting on the windowsill, watching with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since they had met. For the first time in his life, Callum Wren, the invisible boy from Pinewood, the background character in his own story, felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like he mattered. Thank you, Callum whispered. Silas stepped back. He gave the boy a sharp, respectful nod. The kind of nod a commanding officer gives a soldier who has proved himself under fire. No, Silas said. Thank you. He walked toward the door. He paused in the frame, looked back at Marin, and something passed between them. A question asked and answered without words. Then he walked out his boots, heavy on the linoleum, leaving the door open behind him. Marin sat with Callum for a while after her father left. Lenore had gone to call her sister to share the good news, to cry happy tears into a phone in the hallway. The room was quiet except for the beep of the monitors and the distant rumble of engines beginning to stir in the parking lot below. They are leaving, Callum asked, looking toward the window. Yeah, back to the road, back to their lives and you. The question hung in the air like a held note. Marin looked out the window at the sea of chrome and leather assembling in formation below. She could see her father's Road King, gleaming black in the morning sun, waiting at the head of the column. She could go with them. She could ride home, back to Reno, back to the clubhouse, back to the life she had been born into. Her father would welcome her. The club would celebrate. She would be the president's daughter again, shielded, protected, untouchable. Or she could choose something else. I am not going with them, Marin said quietly. Callum looked at her. I am going to stay here for a while. Help your mom while you recover. Get my feet under me. She paused. I'm going to enroll in school, finish my diploma, apply to college. College, Callum blinked. For what law? Marin said the word and it felt right in her mouth, solid and true, like a key turning in a lock. I spent my whole life watching people solve problems with fists and money and fear. I want to learn how to solve them with words, with evidence, with the law. She looked at him, and there was something luminous in her expression, a clarity that came not from desperation but from conviction. You changed something, Callum. You did not throw a punch. You did not pull a weapon. You stood in front of a girl with a dish rag and said no. And that was enough. That was more powerful than 200 motorcycles. She smiled. I want to spend the rest of my life being that kind of powerful. Callum was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, wide enough to crease his pale cheeks and make the pain in his side feel very far away. Law school, he said. That is going to make your dad's head explode. Marin laughed, a real laugh, sudden and bright and surprised. The laugh of a girl who had forgotten she was capable of it. He will survive. He is tough. A knock at the door, soft. Colt stood there holding a black leather vest. He handed it to Marin without a word and walked away. She brought it to the bed and held it up so Callum could see. It was not a full member's cut. It was high-quality leather, clean and new, without the patches and rockers that marked a full member. But on the left breast, a single patch was stitched in white thread against the black leather, protected by the Steel Angels. My dad left this for you, Marin said. She draped it over the back of the chair beside Callum's bed. Wear that and nobody anywhere will ever touch you again. From the parking lot below, the sound began to rise. It started as a low rumble, like the first tremor of an earthquake, vibrating through the walls and the floor and the glass. Then it grew, building in layers, engine after engine joining the chorus until the sound was a living, breathing force that shook the pictures on the walls and made the water in the pitcher on Callum's bedside table tremble. 200 engines roared to life in unison. Marin walked to the window and looked down. The formation was perfect. 3 abreast, stretching back through the parking lot and onto the street, a river of blackened chrome flowing toward the highway. At the head, her father's Road King rumbled with deep, unmistakable authority. She placed her hand against the glass. She could feel the vibration through her palm, through her bones. Silas did not look up. He did not wave. He kicked his bike into gear, and the column moved. 200 machines rolling in perfect formation. Their pipes singing a song that the town of Pinewood would talk about for generations. They rolled down Elm Street, past the hospital, past the diner that was still closed behind yellow police tape, past the hardware store and the barber shop and the church. They turned onto Route 9 and headed for the highway. The sound of their engines faded slowly like thunder rolling away after a storm. Marin watched until the last taillight disappeared beyond the ridge. Then she turned back to the room. Callum was watching her. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but they were warm. "You really are not going," he said. "No." Marin sat back down on the windowsill. She pulled her knee to her chest. "I am done running, Callum. I am done hiding. I am done being someone else's story." She looked out the window at the empty road, at the quiet town settling back into its ordinary rhythm, at the pale October sun climbing above the ridge and spilling golden light across the valley. "This is where I start my own." The legend of Pinewood spread the way all great stories do, in whispers at first, then in louder voices, then in the kind of full-throated telling that happens in diners and barbershops and around campfires when the night is long and the audience is willing. They told the story of the boy who stepped between a girl and a knife with nothing but a dish rag in his own 2 feet. They told the story of the girl who called an army but commanded it with her conscience. They told the story of the father who knelt before a cleaning lady and chose the law over the river. And they told the story of the night that 200 engines shook a town awake and reminded it what thunder sounds like when it comes to answer courage. Callum Wren made a full recovery. He graduated from Pinewood High School with honors. He enrolled in engineering school at Oregon State on the Steel Angels Scholarship, and he graduated at the top of his class. He eventually opened his own restoration shop in Portland, specializing in classic American muscle cars and vintage motorcycles. The matte black iron 883 Sportster sat in the front window of his shop for years, polished and gleaming, a reminder he never needed to explain to anyone. The Ford Taurus his father had left behind ran for another 100,000 miles before Callum finally retired it to the back of the shop. Not because it was broken, but because it had done its job. It had taught him that some things are worth fixing, even when the world tells you to give up. Marin Hartley finished high school in Pinewood. She graduated valedictorian. She went to college at Stanford, then law school at Berkeley. She passed the bar on her first attempt. She never wore the leather again, but she kept a photograph of her father in her office next to a framed menu from Rosie's Diner, the one with the coffee ring stain and the ketchup smear that might have been ketchup and might have been something else. She specialized in federal prosecution, and in her first year as an assistant district attorney, she helped bring down a corruption ring that spanned 3 states. The flash drive had been the first domino. She made sure it was not the last. Oopah. Detective Raymond Whitford was among the 19 law enforcement officers indicted in the federal sweep that followed the Blackwell case. He pleaded guilty to 12 counts of public corruption and was sentenced to 14 years in a federal penitentiary. He never set foot in Pinewood again. Briggs, the former Marine sniper, recovered fully from his leg wound. He rode with the Steel Angels for another decade before retiring to a cabin in Montana with a German shepherd named Buckshot and a view of the mountains that stretched all the way to the horizon. He never talked about the sawmill, but on certain nights when the wind was right and the stars were out, he would sit on his porch and listen to the silence, and he would remember the sound of a 16-year-old girl's voice crackling through a cheap radio, the word that saved a dozen lives. Now, Silas Hartley continued to lead the Steel Angels for another decade. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Pinewood, but those closest to him noticed a change after that October. He was quieter, more deliberate. He still commanded with authority, but the authority had shifted. From the gravity of a man who could destroy to the gravity of a man who chose not to. He visited Pinewood once a year, always in October, always alone. He would park his Road King outside Rosie's Diner, which had reopened under new management with a fresh coat of paint and a working neon sign. And he would sit in the booth where Callum had served coffee to a girl with storm cloud eyes. He would drink his coffee, black, and leave $100 tip on the table. He never explained why. He did not need to. Desmond Blackwell was convicted on 47 federal counts, including money laundering, conspiracy, corruption of public officials, and ordering the attempted murder of a minor. He was sentenced to life without parole. In his sentencing hearing, the judge noted that the evidence against him was among the most comprehensive and cleanly documented he had ever seen. He did not know that the documentation had been managed by a 16-year-old girl standing in a hospital corridor over two disarmed assassins, calmly dictating chain of custody protocols to a man with a scar from his ear to his chin. Lenore Wren quit her second job. She did not need it anymore. She spent her mornings tending a small garden in her backyard and her afternoons volunteering at the hospital where her son had nearly died and been reborn. She never fully understood the world that had descended on her town that October. The chrome and the leather and the men who knelt before her and called her son a hero. But she understood the result. Her boy was alive. Her bills were paid. And a girl named Marin brought flowers to her kitchen table every Sunday afternoon and called her ma'am, and never once let her forget that Callum's courage had meant something. They remained close for the rest of their lives, Callum and Marin, bound by a Tuesday night in October when the world revealed itself in the starkest possible terms: good and evil, courage and cowardice, the choice to stand or the choice to look away. They never became more than friends, though the people of Pinewood speculated endlessly. The truth was simpler and more profound than romance. They were two people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and their most brave. And that kind of seeing creates a bond that does not need a name. It just exists, steady and true, like the heartbeat of a cardiac monitor, counting the moments of a life that almost ended, but did not. The story of Pinewood reminds us of something important. It reminds us that heroes do not always wear capes or carry badges. Sometimes they wear greasy aprons and drive broken-down sedans. Sometimes they are 16-year-old girls who choose the law over the fist, the courtroom over the river, the hard right over the easy wrong. It reminds us that true bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand your ground when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to run. And most of all, it reminds us that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that bleeds and bruises and holds the line, is a currency more valuable than all the gold in the world. In room 304, where a cardiac monitor once counted the fragile heartbeats of a boy who refused to back down, the memory of courage lived on. Not in the chrome and thunder that shook the valley. Not in the flash drive that brought down an empire, but in the quiet, unshakable truth that one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. The thunder had rolled, the storm had passed, and in its wake, two lives began again, stronger than before, forged in the fire of a single night when a boy with a dish rag proved that the bravest thing in the world is not the willingness to fight, it is the willingness to stand.